Riven set down his fork, looked at Pookie like he'd said something incomprehensible. I didn't choose you over them. I chose what was right. You're just the one who helped me see it. But you lost everything. I lost access to people who value money over lives. That's not everything. That's nothing. They think you're weak now. Let them. Riven's expression was calm, certain. I'd rather be weak and right than powerful and wrong. Pookie wanted to believe that. Wanted to think losing social standing didn't matter. But he'd seen how the world worked. Power protected people. Without it, you were vulnerable. What about the fourth man? He asked quietly. Still gone. No movement. No trace. Riven's fingers found his water glass. Turned it slowly. Which means either he's dead or he's waiting. For what? For us to lower our guard. For the right moment. For whatever comes next. That doesn't scare you? Terrifies me. But fear doesn't change the facts. Riven met his eyes. We did what we could. Made the choice we could live with. Now we live with the consequences. The consequences arrived 3 months later in the form of a news report. Pookie was watching TV when the story broke. A major trafficking ring had been dismantled. 12 arrests across 4 countries. The reporter listed names, organizations, connections. None of them were the 4 men from the gala. But the foundation they'd worked for was mentioned, briefly, as a known money laundering front that had recently undergone restructuring and was now under investigation. Pookie's heart raced. He called for Riven. Riven came running, watched the rest of the report in silence. His expression was unreadable. When it ended, he pulled out his phone, made a call. Keisha? It's Riven. I just saw the news. Pause. No, I'm calling to say thank you. Another pause. Because you were right. Taking down the network mattered more than my revenge. Longer pause. I know, but for what it's worth, I'm sorry I made it harder. Final pause. Yeah, you too. He hung up. Pookie stared at him. They got them? The bigger players. Some of them, not all, but enough to break the network. Riven sat down heavily. Our restructuring helped, made the foundation visible, made it easier to trace connections. So we did help. We did. Just not the way I wanted. Riven's mouth curved. Sad. Relieved. Turns out patience works. Who knew? They sat together watching the news cycle through reactions. Politicians claiming credit. Law enforcement celebrating. Victims' advocates calling for more action. Nowhere in any of it was Riven's name. How do you feel? Pookie asked. Invisible. Riven's voice was quiet. And okay with it. Really? Really? He looked at Pookie. The work got done. People are safer. The fact that no one knows I helped? That doesn't change the outcome. But don't you want credit? I wanted you safe. I wanted the system broken. I got both. Riven's hand found Pookie's shoulder. Credit is just ego. And ego gets people killed. Pookie thought about that. About all the times he'd wanted recognition for things he'd done. For surviving. For adapting. For being smart enough to see what others missed. No one had ever given him credit. They just called him different. Difficult. Damaged. Maybe credit didn't matter as much as he'd thought. Over the following months, more news trickled out. The foundation had closed completely. Assets redistributed to legitimate charities. Board members under investigation. The network Riven had helped expose was unraveling piece by piece. And through it all, the 4 men stayed gone. Not arrested. Not charged. Just absent from the world they'd once moved through freely. Do you think they know? Pookie asked one day. That you're why they can't come back? Maybe. Probably. Riven was reading on the couch. He didn't look up. But it doesn't matter. They're gone. That's what counts. Is it enough? It has to be. Pookie sat beside him, quiet, thinking about justice and how it looked different than he'd imagined. How sometimes it wasn't loud, wasn't visible, was just the slow, grinding work of making sure bad things stopped happening. I still hate them, he admitted. Good. You should. Riven closed his book. Hate is honest. It reminds you why you fought. But it doesn't have to control you. How do you let it go? You don't. You just make room for other things too. Riven's hand found his. Like knowing you helped save thousands of kids who'll never know your name. That's worth carrying some hate. Pookie wasn't sure about that. But sitting here in this quiet house with the man who'd chosen principle over power, maybe it was. When the bad guys disappear without punishment and your name appears nowhere in the victory, did you actually win? Or just survive? 4 years later, Pookie stood in Riven's office holding an acceptance letter. Columbia University. Full scholarship. Pre-law. Riven read it over his shoulder. You sure about this? Yeah. Pookie's hands weren't shaking anymore. Hadn't shaken in years. I want to understand the system. How to fix it from inside. That's a long road. So was this. Pookie gestured around the office. At the life they'd built. Quiet. Safe. Separate from the world that had tried to destroy them. I've got time. Riven smiled. Proud. Sad. The way parents looked when their kids were leaving. You ever regret it? Pookie asked. The same question from years ago, but different now. Regret what? The gala. The choice. Letting them go. Riven was quiet for a long moment. Then, no. Not even a little. Why not? Because I look at you and see someone who knows the difference between justice and revenge. Between doing good and feeling good. That's rarer than you think. Riven's hand found his shoulder. If I'd chosen differently, if I'd gone for blood instead of change, you wouldn't have learned that. And that lesson's worth more than any arrest. Pookie's throat tightened. What if I can't fix it? The system. What if it's too broken? Then you'll break it better. Build something new. Riven's grip tightened. You've already proven you can see what others miss. That's the first step. They stood like that for a while. Father and son in everything but paper. Family built not on blood but on choice. On someone seeing a scared kid in a group home and deciding his life mattered. On that kid trusting enough to stay. The fourth man never came back, Pookie said quietly. No. Think he's dead. Probably. Men like that don't retire. They just stop showing up. Riven's expression was neutral, carefully blank. Could be he got reassigned. Could be he met someone scarier than us. Could be he looked at what happened to his network and decided we weren't worth the risk. You don't sound sure. I'm not. But I'm not afraid anymore either. Riven let go, stepped back. Fear kept me sharp for a while. Then it just kept me tired. So I chose to let it go. How? By accepting that I can't control everything. Can't prevent every threat. Can only do my best and trust that's enough. Pookie thought about that. About the years of hypervigilance. Of watching doors and counting exits and reading lips because he couldn't trust his ears. About how exhausting it was to always be on guard. I want that, he said. To not be afraid. You'll get there. Riven's voice was certain. You're already halfway. You're just too close to see it. Later that night, Pookie found himself in the room where Riven had hidden him after the gala. The safe room, the locked door, the place where everything had changed. It looked different now. Not scary, just small. A room like any other. He sat in the chair where he'd waited. Remembered his hands shaking around cold tea. Remembered the weight of knowing he'd saved someone and wondering if it mattered. It had mattered. Not the way he'd thought. Not in headlines or arrests or public recognition. But in the quiet way that actual change happened. Slowly. Invisibly. Through 1,000 small decisions that added up to something bigger. The foundation was gone. The network broken. The charities still running. And somewhere, kids were eating meals and getting medicine because Riven had chosen prevention over punishment. Because Pookie had helped him make that choice. His phone buzzed. Text from Riven. Forgot to mention. Someone wants to talk to you. Transferred the call to your phone. Before Pookie could respond, it rang. Unknown number. He answered. Hello, Pookie. The voice was unfamiliar. Female. Professional. This is Deputy Director Monroe. We met once. 4 years ago. Pookie's heart kicked. I remember. Good. Because I owe you an apology. She paused. And an explanation. For what? For asking Riven to back off. For prioritizing the case over your safety. Another pause. I was wrong. About a lot of things. But mostly about underestimating a 13-year-old who saw what trained agents missed. Pookie didn't know what to say. The network we took down? Started with your tip. With what you saw at that gala. Everything else came from there. Her voice was warm, respectful. You saved more lives than you know. And I wanted you to hear that from someone who was there. Thank you, Pookie managed. No, thank you. And if you ever want to talk about a career in intelligence. She laughed. Well, we could use people who notice things. The call ended. Pookie sat in the dark, phone in hand, feeling something shift inside his chest. Recognition, not the public kind. Not headlines or awards or people clapping. Just the quiet knowledge that what he'd done mattered. That being different. Being someone who saw the world sideways and couldn't trust his ears, so he learned to trust his eyes, had value. Had saved people. He went back to Riven's office. Found him still reading. Still comfortable in this smaller, quieter life they'd built. Monroe called, Pookie said. I know. I gave her your number. Riven looked up. You mad? No. Just. Pookie searched for words. Surprised. That people noticed? That it mattered. That I mattered. Riven set down his book. You've always mattered. You just needed the world to catch up. Pookie sat beside him. Quiet. Thinking about Columbia. About law school. About learning to fix systems from the inside instead of just surviving them. I'm scared, he admitted. Of what? That I'll get there and realize I'm not special. That lip reading and seeing patterns isn't enough. That I'm just a kid who got lucky once. You're a kid who got smart and stayed brave when it mattered most. Riven's voice was firm. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. You've been preparing your whole life. The opportunities are just starting. Maybe he was right. Maybe the scared kid who'd slapped a plate and saved a life had grown into someone who could change more than just one moment. Maybe home wasn't a place or a person, but the knowledge that someone believed in you enough to let you become who you needed to be. Thanks, Pookie said. For everything. For what? You did the hard part. No, you did. You saw me when no one else was looking. You listened when no one else could hear. Pookie's voice cracked. You made me believe I was worth protecting. Riven pulled him close. Held tight. You were always worth it. I just made sure you knew. They sat together as the sun set outside. Father and son. Family built on choice and trust and the understanding that some power protected by disappearing. Some love listened first. And some justice, the kind that actually mattered, happened so quietly that no one ever knew to applaud. But it happened anyway, and that was enough. If you found this story inspiring, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might inspire someone else who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the bravest thing we do is choosing what's right over what feels good. And that choice, that's what changes everything. The chandelier pressed into Nyx's skull like a migraine made of light. He kept his eyes down, counting marble tiles beneath his feet. 43 from the entrance to the center of the ballroom, because looking up meant seeing faces, and seeing faces meant being seen. The scent suppressant patch behind his ear burned like a cigarette held too close, mixing with the smell of leather shoes polished to mirrors, champagne that cost more than his rent, and alpha pheromones thick enough to choke on. His jacket hung 2 sizes too big. Intentional. The pregnancy wasn't showing yet, but Omegas learned early that loose fabric bought time, and time bought survival. The handler, a beta woman with a clipboard and dead eyes, hadn't mentioned children. Stand there, she'd said at the service entrance, pointing to a spot near the west wall. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact. Don't exist louder than the furniture. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Nyx had nodded because nodding was safe. He'd been hired under a false name, a fake reference, and a forged background check that cost him 3 months' savings. The Harrowcrest estate didn't hire Omegas with histories. They hired ghosts. He was good at being a ghost. The ballroom stretched out like a cathedral built to worship money. Chandeliers hung from ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. Men in suits sharp enough to cut stood in clusters, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, drinking wine that tasted like violence. Security pretended to be staff. Staff pretended not to hear anything. Nyx's ears popped from the pressure of too many voices in too much space. A server passed carrying a tray of champagne flutes arranged like soldiers. Nyx took one, not to drink, but to hold. Empty hands drew attention. He pressed the glass against his palm, felt the cold seep into his skin, used the pain to anchor himself. Someone brushed past him. Too close, too deliberate. Alpha, tall. Cologne that smelled like burned cedar and old money. The man didn't apologize, didn't even glance back. Nyx's stomach twisted. He recognized the scent. Not the man. The type. The kind of alpha who moved through the world like it owed him space, who looked at Omegas the way people looked at furniture that needed replacing. Nyx had reported men like that once. It had cost him everything. A door opened across the room. Footsteps. Small. Fast. Nyx's head snapped up before he could stop himself. A child. Dark hair pulled into 2 braids. Maybe 8 years old. Wearing a velvet dress the color of midnight and shoes that clicked against marble like Morse code. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no, dodging between alphas twice her size, heading straight toward. Nyx froze. The girl was looking at him. Not past him. Not through him. At him. Her eyes were brown, sharp, older than they should have been. She stopped 3 feet away, tilted her head, and her hands moved. Sign language. Fast. Fluid. Emotional. You. Nyx's breath caught in his throat. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot. The room didn't stop, but it slowed. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The beta handler appeared at Nyx's elbow, hissing something he couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. The girl kept signing. I know you. You left. Nyx's hands moved before his brain caught up. I didn't want to. The girl's face crumpled. Her hands flew faster, angrier, tears pooling in her eyes but not falling. They said you weren't coming back. They said you forgot me. Nyx's chest tightened so hard he thought his ribs might crack. I didn't forget you, Saran. The name left his hands like a confession. And that's when the silence spread. It started near the door. Conversations cutting off mid-sentence, laughter dying in throats, and rippled outward like a stone dropped in still water. Nyx felt it before he understood it. The weight of attention, the shift in air pressure when power enters a room. Someone important was watching. Nyx didn't look up, couldn't. His hands were still frozen mid-sign. Saran's small fingers wrapped around his wrist, anchoring him in place. The handler grabbed his shoulder. You need to leave. Now. But Saran didn't let go. Her grip tightened, and she turned toward the crowd, toward whoever was making the room hold its breath, and signed something Nyx couldn't see. Then a voice cut through the silence. Low, calm. The kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. Let him stay. Nyx's stomach dropped. He knew that voice. He'd heard it once before, 2 years ago, through a closed door in a hallway he wasn't supposed to be in, giving orders that weren't supposed to be questioned. Kael Dravik, Alpha, Enforcer, the man who solved problems quietly and permanently. Saran's father. Nyx forced himself to look up. Kael stood 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, suit tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. Tall, broad-shouldered, face carved from stone, expression unreadable. His eyes were gray, the color of smoke before a fire spreads, and they were locked on Nyx with the kind of focus that made prey animals stop running. Nyx's pulse hammered in his throat. Kael's gaze dropped to Saran's hands still wrapped around Nyx's wrist, then back to Nyx's face. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just watched. Then his hands moved. Sign language. Fluid. Perfect. No hesitation. You know my daughter. It wasn't a question. Nyx's hands trembled as he answered. I used to work with her. Before. Before what? The handler tried to intervene. Mr. Dravik. I can have him removed. Kael raised one hand. The handler stopped mid-sentence, mouth snapping shut like a trap. Saran tugged on Nyx's sleeve, signing rapidly. He doesn't know. Tell him. Tell him what they did. Nyx's heart slammed against his ribs. He couldn't. Not here. Not with a room full of alphas watching, some of whom had paid to bury the truth the first time. But before he could sign anything, before he could breathe, a new voice joined the conversation. Well, Nyx went cold. The voice came from behind him. Smooth, polite, the kind of polite that came with lawyers and offshore accounts. Nyx turned slowly. The alpha from earlier, the one who'd brushed past him, stood 3 feet away, champagne glass in hand, smile sharp as a knife, gray suit, silver cufflinks. Face Nyx had seen in depositions and police reports that went nowhere. Councilman Thorne, the man Nyx had reported 2 years ago, the man who'd gotten him fired, blacklisted, and run out of the city. Thorne's smile widened. I remember you. What do you think Nyx should do, run or stand his ground? Drop your answer below. Saran's hands moved so fast Nyx almost couldn't follow. Who is he? Why does he look at you like that? Nyx didn't answer. Couldn't. His throat had closed around the words, and his hands felt like they belonged to someone else. Numb, useless, hanging at his sides while Councilman Thorne took a slow sip of champagne and watched him like a cat watches a bird with a broken wing. Thorne didn't speak. Didn't need to. The silence did the work for him. Kael shifted his weight, a motion so small most people wouldn't notice, but Nyx felt it. The air changed. Tension stretched across the space between the 3 of them like a wire pulled too tight. You know this Omega? Kael's voice was flat, not curious, not concerned, just gathering information. Thorne tilted his head, smile still in place. Briefly, years ago, he worked for one of those charity programs. Accessibility services, wasn't it? His eyes flicked to Saran, then back to Nyx. I'm surprised to see him here. I thought he'd moved on. Moved on. The words landed like a slap. Nyx's hands clenched into fists. The suppressant patch burned hotter, and he could feel sweat gathering at the base of his spine, soaking into the too big jacket that suddenly felt like a straitjacket. Saran pulled on his sleeve again, harder this time. Tell him. Tell my father what happened. But Nyx couldn't look at her. If he looked at her, he'd break, and breaking meant crying, and crying meant losing the only thing he had left. Control. Kael's gaze hadn't moved. He was still watching Nyx, reading him the way people read maps, tracing the route from where he was to where he'd been. You worked with my daughter. It wasn't a question, but Nyx nodded anyway. Kael's jaw tightened, just slightly. Why did you stop? Thorne answered before Nyx could. He resigned. Professional differences, if I recall. These programs can be very demanding. Not everyone's cut out for the work. His tone was light, casual, the kind of lie that sounded like truth because it was wrapped in silk. Nyx's stomach twisted. Saran's face flushed red. Her hands flew. Liar. Thorne didn't understand sign language. Didn't even glance at her. But Kael did. His eyes narrowed, just a fraction. And for the first time since he'd spoken, his attention shifted fully to Thorne. Resigned, Kael repeated. That's right. Voluntarily. Thorne's smile thinned. Of course. Kael looked back at Nyx. Is that true? The room was still watching. Not obviously. Not all at once. But Nyx could feel the weight of 100 conversations paused. 100 pairs of eyes pretending not to look while they absolutely were. This was a test. Not from Kael. From the room. From the system. From every alpha who'd ever looked at an Omega and decided his word wasn't worth the breath it took to speak it. Nyx's hands moved. Slow. Deliberate. No. Saran gasped. Kael's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. something cold and precise like a blade sliding into place. Thorn set his champagne glass down on a passing server's tray. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "I don't misunderstand," Kael said quietly. The room went silent. Not the polite kind of silence where people pretended to give you privacy. The real kind. The kind that happened when a predator showed its teeth. Thorn's smile finally cracked. "Kael, I don't know what he's told you, but this Omega has a history of making accusations." "Stop talking." Thorn stopped. Kael took one step forward. Not toward Thorn, toward Nyx. Close enough that Nyx could smell him, smoke and steel and something sharper underneath. Something that made the Omega part of his brain scream run while the human part whispered stay. Kael's hands moved. What happened? Nyx's breath hitched. He could lie. Should lie. Walking into this estate under a fake name with a baby growing inside him and a past that had teeth was already the kind of stupid that got people killed. Telling the truth here, now, in front of Thorn and a ballroom full of witnesses who'd already chosen their side 2 years ago. That was suicide. But Saran was watching him with eyes that still believed the world could be fair. And Kael was waiting. Nyx's hands trembled as he signed. "I reported abuse. They buried it. Then they buried me." Saran made a sound, small, broken, the kind of noise that didn't need translation. Kael's face remained stone, but his hands didn't stop. "Who?" Nyx glanced at Thorn. That was answer enough. Kael turned to Thorn, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Leave." Thorn's face went white. "You can't be serious. Now." For 3 seconds, Thorn didn't move. Then he did. Slowly, stiffly. Like a man walking to his own execution. He stopped at the edge of the ballroom, looked back once, and smiled. Not at Kael. "Nyx, this won't end the way you think it will," Thorn said softly. Then he left. The room exhaled. Conversations resumed. Champagne glasses refilled. The machine of the evening kept running because machines didn't stop for one Omega's truth. Nyx's knees felt like water. Saran grabbed his hand, squeezing hard enough to hurt. "You stayed. You came back." Nyx shook his head. "I didn't come back for you. I came back because I had nowhere else to go." It was the truth, the ugliest version of it. But Saran just smiled, tears streaming down her face, and signed 4 words that made Nyx's chest crack open. "You're here. That's enough." Kael's hand landed on Nyx's shoulder, firm, grounding, not a threat but not quite safety either. "Come with me." It wasn't a request. The beta handler appeared, reaching for Nyx's other arm. "Mr. Dravik, I can escort him out." "No." Kael's voice was quiet, final. "He stays." The handler hesitated, then stepped back. Kael's hand stayed on Nyx's shoulder, steering him toward a side door Nyx hadn't noticed, Saran trailing behind them like a shadow. As they walked, Nyx caught sight of his reflection in one of the ballroom's massive mirrors. He looked small, pale, breakable, but he was still standing. For now. The door closed behind them with a sound like a casket lid. And Nyx realized too late that leaving the ballroom didn't mean leaving the danger. It just meant no one else would hear him scream. "Do you think Kael is really trying to help? Or is this another trap? Comment your theory." The room Kael led them to smelled like old books and expensive whiskey. No windows, one door, walls lined with shelves that held leather-bound volumes no one had read in decades, the kind of books rich people bought by the foot to prove they had culture. A desk sat in the center, dark wood, polished to a mirror shine, with nothing on it except a single lamp that cast long shadows across the floor. Nyx's pulse hammered in his throat. Kael closed the door, locked it. The click echoed. Saran immediately climbed into one of the oversized leather chairs, tucking her feet under her, watching both of them with eyes too sharp for a child. Kael didn't sit, didn't move toward the desk, just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at Nyx the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. Clinical, detached, searching for the fracture. Nyx forced himself to meet that gaze. His hands stayed at his sides, fingers twitching with the urge to sign something, anything, just to fill the silence. But silence was Kael's language. He spoke it fluently. 30 seconds passed. Then a minute. Nyx's breathing grew shallow. The suppressant patch itched. The jacket felt too tight across his chest, and his stomach twisted with nausea that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. Finally, Kael's hands moved. "How long have you been back in the city?" Nyx blinked. Of all the questions he'd expected, that wasn't one of them. His hands answered before his brain could stop them. 3 weeks. "Where are you staying?" "A motel. East Side." Kael's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Not pity. Calculation. "You came back alone." It wasn't a question, but Nyx nodded anyway. Kael's gaze dropped, just for a second, to Nyx's stomach. Nyx's breath caught. The jacket was loose. The pregnancy barely showed. There was no way Kael could know unless... "I can smell it," Kael signed. Faint, but there. Nyx's hands flew up instinctively, crossing over his abdomen like that could hide anything now. Saran sat up straighter, eyes wide. "You're pregnant?" Nyx didn't answer. Kael's jaw tightened. "The father? Gone." Nyx's hands moved sharp, clipped. "Not relevant." "Everything's relevant." "Not that." They stared at each other. Two people speaking the same language but not saying the same thing. Kael broke first. He crossed to the desk, leaned against it, arms folded. The posture was casual, but his eyes stayed locked on Nyx. "You reported Councilman Thorne 2 years ago," Kael said aloud. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of tone that didn't need volume to carry weight. "For what?" Nyx swallowed hard. His throat felt like sandpaper. "Exploitation," he said. His voice cracked on the word. He was using the nonprofit as a cover, funneling omegas into private households under the guise of service programs. Once they were placed, they couldn't leave. No contracts, no protection. If they complained, he trailed off. "They disappeared," Kael finished. Nyx nodded. Saran's face had gone pale. Kael's expression remained unreadable. "You had evidence." "I had testimony, recordings, financial records showing discrepancies in the nonprofit's budget. I took it to the police, then to the district attorney, then to the media." Nyx's hands clenched into fists. No one cared. Thorne had friends, donors, people who owed him favors. By the time I realized how deep it went, I'd already lost my job, my apartment, my references. "So you ran." "I survived." Kael's eyes narrowed. "And now you're back. Why?" Nyx hesitated. He could lie, should lie, but Kael would know. Alphas always knew. "Because I'm out of options," Nyx said quietly. "I needed money, needed work, needed to disappear somewhere no one would ask questions." He gestured vaguely toward the door, toward the ballroom beyond. "Your estate hires under the table. I thought I could stay invisible." "You were wrong." "Yeah." Nyx's laugh was bitter. "I was wrong." Kael pushed off the desk, took 2 steps closer. Not threatening, not comforting, just present. "Thorne will come after you now," Kael said. "You understand that?" Nyx nodded. "He won't do it publicly, won't be obvious. But he'll make sure you disappear. Permanently this time." "I know." "Then why stay?" The question hung in the air between them. Nyx looked at Saran. The girl was watching him with an expression that made his chest ache. Hope mixed with something that looked like recognition, like she'd been waiting for someone to tell the truth out loud, and finally, someone had. "'Cause running didn't work," Nyx signed. "And I'm tired of being afraid." Kael's hands moved before Nyx finished. "Fear keeps you alive." "No," Nyx signed back. "Fear keeps you breathing." That's not the same thing. For the first time since they'd entered the room, Kael's expression shifted. Not much, just a slight softening around the eyes, a barely perceptible nod. Like Nyx had said something that made sense in a language Kael thought only he spoke. Saran slid out of the chair, walked over to Nyx, and took his hand. Her fingers were small, warm, steady. "I missed you," she signed with her free hand. Nyx's throat tightened. "I missed you too." Kael watched them for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, and pocketed it again. "You'll stay here tonight," he said aloud. Nyx's head snapped up. "What?" "Not in the estate. The guest house. East Wing. Saran's former nanny used it before she retired. It's empty now." Kael's tone left no room for argument. "You'll stay there until we figure out what to do about Thorn. I didn't ask for your help. I know. I don't need." "Yes," Kael interrupted. "You do." Nyx's hands moved before he could stop them. Why would you help me?" Kael's gaze flicked to Saran, then back to Nyx. His hands answered, "Because my daughter trusts you, and I trust her." It wasn't a promise, wasn't even reassurance, but it was something. Nyx opened his mouth to respond, to argue, to thank him, to ask what the hell this was going to cost. When a knock sounded at the door, sharp, urgent. Kael crossed the room in 3 strides, unlocked the door, opened it a crack. A beta man in a security uniform stood on the other side, face pale, breathing hard. "Sir, we have a situation." Kael's expression went cold. "What kind of situation?" "Someone from the prosecutor's office just arrived. Unannounced. They're asking for you." The guard hesitated. "And they're asking about an Omega named Nyx Elowen." Nyx's blood turned to ice. Kael's jaw tightened. Saran grabbed Nyx's hand harder. And somewhere in the estate, a door opened that had been closed for 2 years. "Who do you think sent the prosecutor, an ally or an enemy? Drop your guess below." The prosecutor's name was Amara Hightower, and she looked like someone who'd stopped believing in justice but still showed up to work anyway. Mid-40s, dark skin. Hair pulled into a bun so tight it could have been a weapon. Pantsuit the color of charcoal, wrinkled at the elbows like she'd been wearing it for 3 days straight. She stood in the center of the ballroom with the kind of exhausted authority that came from fighting battles no one wanted her to win. Nyx stood at the edge of the room, half hidden behind Kael, watching. Saran had been sent upstairs. She'd argued, hands flying, face flushed. But Kael had signed 1 word, and she'd gone. "Please." Now it was just the 3 of them. Kael, Amara, and Nyx, whose entire body felt like a live wire. Amara's eyes found him immediately. "Nyx Elowen," she said. Not a question. A confirmation. Nyx nodded. "You're a hard man to find." "I wasn't trying to be found. That much is obvious." Amara pulled a folder from her bag, flipped it open. 2 years ago, you filed a report with my office. Alleged exploitation of Omegas through a nonprofit called Pathways Forward. You provided testimony, financial records, and recordings. Do you remember that? Yes. And do you remember what happened to that report? Nyx's jaw tightened. It disappeared. It was dismissed, Amara corrected. Officially, lack of evidence, conflicting testimony, unreliable witness. She looked up from the folder, met his eyes. I signed off on it. The room went silent. Nyx felt the words like a punch to the gut. Kael shifted his weight. His voice was low, dangerous. You're admitting to burying a case. I'm admitting to doing what I was told. Amara's tone was flat, matter of fact. Councilman Thorn has a lot of friends, donors, people who make calls to people who make decisions. When your office gets a call from the mayor's chief of staff suggesting you reconsider a case, you reconsider. And now, Kael's voice was ice. Amara closed the folder. Now I'm here because 3 weeks ago, one of Thorn's former associates, a man named Reeve Cullens, was arrested on unrelated charges. Fraud, embezzlement. During the investigation, we found files, emails, communications between Cullens and Thorn detailing the exact scheme Nyx reported 2 years ago. Nyx's heart slammed against his ribs. Pathways Forward wasn't just exploiting Omegas, Amara continued. It was trafficking them, hundreds of them, placed in households across the state under the guise of employment programs. Once they were placed, their documents were confiscated. They were told they owed debts for housing, training, placement fees. If they tried to leave, they were threatened with deportation, arrest, or worse. Kael's hands curled into fists. Thorn ran the operation? He asked. Thorn funded it. Cullens managed it. And a dozen other people, politicians, business owners, donors, benefited from it. Amara's gaze shifted back to Nyx. You were right. About all of it. And I'm sorry. The apology landed like a stone in still water. Nyx didn't know what to do with it. Why are you here? He asked quietly. Because we're building a case. A real one this time. And we need your testimony. Nyx's stomach dropped. No. Amara blinked. Excuse me? No. Nyx repeated. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. I gave you my testimony 2 years ago. I gave you everything I had, and you buried it. You let them bury me. I'm not doing this again. This time is different. That's what you said last time. Amara's jaw tightened. I understand you're angry. I'm not angry. Nyx's voice cracked. I'm smart. You want me to stand up in front of a courtroom full of people who've already decided I'm a liar. You want me to relive the worst months of my life so you can build a case that'll get plea bargain down to nothing. And when it's over, when Thorn's lawyers are done shredding me on the stand, I'll be exactly where I was 2 years ago. Except now I'll have a target on my back and a baby to protect. The word slipped out before he could stop it. Amara's eyes widened slightly. Kael's expression didn't change, but Nyx felt the shift in his attention. Amara recovered quickly. I can offer protection. You can't. Nyx's voice was flat. You couldn't protect me then. You won't be able to protect me now. The only thing testifying will do is make sure I'm visible again. And visibility gets Omegas killed. Amara opened her mouth. Closed it. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked uncertain. If you don't testify, she said carefully, Thorn walks. Maybe not today. Maybe not this year. But eventually he walks. And this happens again. That's not my problem. Yes, Amara said quietly. It is. The ballroom doors opened. Councilman Thorn walked in. He wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him. Alphas, both of them, dressed in suits that cost more than most people made in a year. Lawyers, probably. Maybe worse. Thorn's eyes found Nyx immediately. He smiled. Ms. Hightower, Thorn said pleasantly. I wasn't expecting to see you here. Amara's expression went carefully neutral. Councilman, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Thorn's gaze slid to Nyx. Though I have to say, I'm surprised to see Mr. Elowen still on the premises. I was under the impression he'd resigned from the evening staff. He's my guest, Kael said. Thorn raised an eyebrow. Your guest. That's what I said. Thorn's smile widened. How generous of you, Kael, though I have to wonder if you're aware of Mr. Elowen's history. He has a tendency to make rather serious accusations without evidence to support them. I've heard, Kael said flatly. Then you understand why I'm concerned. Thorn took a step closer, hands clasped behind his back. Mr. Elowen's presence here tonight feels less like coincidence and more like provocation, especially with Ms. Hightower present. I'm here on official business, Amara said. Official business. Thorn's tone was light, mocking. How official can it be when it's built on the word of a man who's already been discredited? Nyx's hands clenched into fists. Thorn turned to face him fully now. Tell me, Mr. Elowen, how much did they pay you to come back? Or did you come back on your own, hoping for another payday? Nyx's vision blurred at the edges. That's enough, Kael said, but Thorn ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on Nyx, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped low enough that only the people closest could hear. You should have stayed gone. Nyx's breath hitched, and then Saran appeared. She shouldn't have been there. Kael had sent her upstairs, but she was 8 years old and stubborn, and she'd clearly decided the rules didn't apply when someone she cared about was in danger. She ran straight to Nyx, grabbed his hand, and turned to face Thorn. Her hands moved fast, furious. Leave him alone. Thorn blinked, looked at Kael. Your daughter understands more than you think, Kael said quietly. Saran kept signing. You're a liar. You hurt people. I know what you did. Thorn's smile finally cracked. Kael, control your... She's not wrong. The room went still. Kael took one step forward. Just one. But it was enough to make Thorn's lawyers shift their weight. Enough to make the air feel thinner. You need to leave, Kael said. Thorn's face flushed. You're making a mistake. No, you made the mistake 2 years ago, and now it's coming back. Thorn stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Nyx, at Saran, at Amara. This isn't over, he said softly. Then he turned and walked out. His lawyers followed. The doors closed. Nyx's knees buckled. Kael caught him before he hit the floor. I've got you, Kael murmured. But Nyx wasn't sure that was true. Because when he looked up, he saw Amara watching him with an expression that looked like hope. And hope, Nyx had learned, was the most dangerous thing of all. Do you think Nyx should testify or stay hidden? Let us know what you'd do. The guest house smelled like lavender and dust. It sat at the edge of the estate, separated from the main building by a stretch of garden that looked wild in the moonlight. Roses gone thorny, hedges overgrown, stone paths cracked by roots that had grown too strong to be contained. Nyx stood in the doorway, staring at the single room that was supposed to be safety. A bed, a dresser, a bathroom through a narrow door on the left. One window with curtains that didn't quite close. Everything was clean, functional, impersonal. The kind of space that had been lived in by people who didn't leave marks. Kael stood behind him, silent. Saran had finally gone to bed, escorted by a beta woman with kind eyes and a firm hand. She'd signed goodnight to Nyx 3 times before she'd let herself be led away, each repetition a little more desperate, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she stopped watching. Now it was just the 2 of them. Nyx stepped inside. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. There's food in the fridge, Kael said. Not much. Bread, eggs, cheese. I'll have someone bring more tomorrow. Nyx nodded. Didn't turn around. The door locks from the inside. No one has a key except me. You're safe here. Am I? The question came out sharper than Nyx intended. Kael didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was careful. Safer than you were 3 hours ago. Nyx finally turned. Kael stood in the doorway, backlit by the porch light, face half in shadow. He looked tired. Not physically, but the kind of tired that came from carrying weight that didn't belong to you. Why are you helping me? Nyx asked. I already told you. No, you told me why you're letting me stay. I'm asking why you're helping. Nyx's hands moved before he could stop them. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. So why? Kael's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then his hands moved. Because I know what it's like to be silenced. Nyx blinked. Kael continued. Not the same way. Not the same reasons. But I know what it feels like to have something taken from you and be told it's for your own good. His hands paused, then moved again. Saran was born deaf. The doctors told me to fix it. Implants, surgery, therapy to make her normal. They said it like it was a problem that needed solving. His expression hardened. I told them no. Nyx's throat tightened. I learned sign language, Kael continued. Hired tutors. Made sure everyone in my house could communicate with her. And when people told me I was making a mistake, that I was limiting her, I stopped listening. His hands dropped. You stood up for yourself when no one else would, Kael said aloud. That takes more courage than most people have. I'm not going to let that get you killed. Nyx's chest ached. What if I don't want your protection? Then don't take it. Kael's tone was even. The door's unlocked. You can leave anytime. But if you stay on my terms. Which are? You don't disappear without telling me. You don't take risks that put my daughter in danger. And if Amara Hightower comes back asking for your testimony. Kael's eyes locked on his. You think about it. Nyx's hands curled into fists. I already told her no. I know. I'm asking you to reconsider. Why? Because Thorn won't stop. You know that. He'll come after you whether you testify or not. The only difference is whether you go down fighting or go down silent. Nyx's breath came faster. You don't understand. I understand more than you think. Kael took one step into the room. Not close, just enough to close the distance between them. I've spent my entire life in rooms like that ballroom. I know how power works. I know what it costs to stand up to it. And I know that if you don't fight, someone else will pay the price. That's not fair. No, it's not. Kael's voice softened, just slightly. But it's true. Nyx's hands trembled. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell Kael that he didn't owe the world anything, that he'd already paid his dues, that survival was enough. But then he thought about Saran, about the way she'd stood in front of Thorn and called him a liar without hesitation, about the other Omegas who were still trapped in houses they couldn't leave, working jobs they couldn't quit, disappearing into systems that didn't care if they lived or died. Kael's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his expression darkened. "What is it?" Nyx asked. Kael didn't answer, just turned the phone around. The screen showed a news alert. Breaking: Prosecutor Amara Hightower suspended pending internal investigation. Nyx's stomach dropped. "They're burying it again," he whispered. "No." Kael's voice was cold. "They're trying to. There's a difference." He pocketed the phone, looked at Nyx. "You have a choice to make, and you need to make it soon." Then he turned and walked out, closing the door behind him. Nyx stood alone in the small room, heart pounding, hands shaking. He crossed to the window, looked out at the dark garden, the estate beyond. Somewhere in that building, Saran was sleeping. Somewhere in the city, Amara Hightower was fighting a battle she might not win. And somewhere, Councilman Thorn was making calls. Nyx's hand drifted to his stomach. The baby was barely there yet. Just a flutter, promise, but it was enough. He pulled out the burner phone he'd been carrying for 3 weeks, the one with no contacts, no history, nothing that could be traced, and he made a call. It rang twice before someone answered. "This is Amara Hightower." Nyx's voice was steady when he spoke. "It's Nyx Elowen. I need to talk to you about my testimony." There was a pause. Then Amara's voice came through, quiet and careful. "I'm listening. What do you think will happen next? Will Nyx's testimony save them or destroy them?" Comment below. The recording device sat on the table between them like a loaded gun. Nyx stared at it, small, black, red light blinking, and wondered if this was what betrayal looked like when you chose it yourself. Amara sat across from him in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the estate, her face drawn tight with exhaustion. It was 2 in the morning. The place was empty except for a bored barista wiping down counters and pretending not to listen. "Start from the beginning," Amara said quietly. Nyx's hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. It had gone cold 20 minutes ago. "I was hired by Pathways Forward in March 2 years ago," he said. His voice sounded flat in his own ears. "I was supposed to provide sign language interpretation for children in wealthy households. The pay was good. Better than anything else I could find." Amara made a note on her legal pad. "How many families did you work with?" 7. Over the course of 6 months. "And when did you notice something was wrong?" Nyx's jaw tightened. "The 2nd week." The coffee shop door opened. A man walked in, beta, middle-aged, wearing a jacket with the collar turned up. He ordered black coffee, paid cash, sat in the corner booth facing the door. Nyx's pulse spiked. Amara noticed. She glanced at the man, then back at Nyx. "Do you know him?" "No." "Then keep going." But Nyx couldn't shake the feeling that the man was watching. Not obviously, just present, aware. He forced himself to focus. "The families I worked with, they treated the Omegas like furniture. Worse than furniture. At least furniture gets maintained." His hands clenched around the mug. "I'd show up to interpret for a child, and I'd see bruises on the Omega staff. Hear them being spoken to like animals. When I asked questions, I got told to mind my business." "Did you report it?" "To my supervisor at Pathways. 3 times. Nothing changed." "What happened the 4th time?" Nyx's breath caught. This was the part that had cost him everything. "I was assigned to a house in the Northern District. Big place. Gated. The family had a son who was deaf, 8 years old. Sweet kid. But the Omega working there. His name was Elijah. He was terrified. Amara leaned forward. Terrified of what? The father, Alpha, owned a construction company. Nyx's voice broke. He swallowed hard, forced himself to continue. He'd been assaulting Elijah for months. When I found out, I told Elijah to come forward, to report it. He said he couldn't. Said he owed the family money for placement fees, housing costs, training. If he left, they'd have him arrested. Did you believe him? I didn't know what to believe, so I started digging. The man in the corner booth stood up, left his coffee untouched, walked out. Nyx watched him go, heart hammering. Amara didn't seem concerned. What did you find? Contracts. Fake ones. Designed to trap Omegas in debt they couldn't pay off. I found emails between my supervisor and the families discussing inventory. That's what they called us. Inventory. His voice shook. I recorded conversations, took photos of documents, built a case, and then I went to the police. And they ignored you. They did more than ignore me. They told the families I was investigating them. Within a week, I was fired. My apartment lease was terminated. My bank account was frozen. I tried to go to the media, but no one would touch the story. Amara's expression was grim. Because Thorn made calls. Because Thorn owned people. Amara clicked off the recorder. This is good. This is what we need. It's what you needed 2 years ago. I know. Amara's voice was quiet. And I'm sorry, but this time will be different. Nyx finished. You keep saying that. Because it's true. We have Reeve Cullens in custody. We have his files. We have financial records proving the scheme. What we don't have is someone willing to stand up in court and say it out loud. Nyx stood abruptly. I need air. He walked out of the coffee shop, onto the sidewalk, into the cold night air that bit at his skin and made his lungs ache. Behind him, the door opened. Amara followed. I know what I'm asking you to do, she said. No, you don't. Nyx turned to face her. You're asking me to paint a target on my back. You're asking me to stand up in front of people who've already decided I'm worthless and beg them to believe me. And when it's over, when Thorn's lawyers have torn me apart and the jury's decided I'm just another lying Omega trying to get attention, you'll go home to your family and I'll go into hiding with a baby I can barely afford to feed. Amara flinched. You're right, she said quietly. I don't know what that's like, but I know what happens if you don't testify. Thorn walks. The system stays intact. And 10 years from now, someone else will be standing where you are, making the same choice. Nyx's hands moved to his stomach, protective, instinctive. I can't save everyone. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to save yourself. Before Nyx could respond, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out. Unknown number. He answered anyway. Hello. Silence. Then a voice. Low. Familiar. You should have stayed gone. Councilman Thorn. Nyx's blood turned to ice. How did you get this number? I get whatever I want, Mr. Elowen. You know that. Thorn's tone was pleasant, conversational. I wanted to give you one last chance. Walk away. Drop this crusade. Disappear. I'll even make it worth your while. $50,000. Cash. No questions asked. Nyx's grip tightened on the phone. And if I don't? Then I stop being polite. The line went dead. Nyx stared at the phone, hands shaking. Amara was watching him, face pale. What did he say? But Nyx didn't answer, because across the street, parked in the shadows between streetlights, sat a black sedan with tinted windows. Engine running, waiting. Is Thorn bluffing or is Nyx in real danger? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. The files arrived at dawn. Kael found them on his desk. An unmarked manila envelope, thick with paper, sealed with tape that had been carefully placed to show if it had been tampered with. He didn't open it immediately, just stood there, coffee growing cold in his hand, staring at the thing like it might explode. Saran appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Her hands moved. "What is it?" "I don't know yet." She padded across the room, climbed into the chair opposite his desk, tucked her feet under her. Waiting, Kael broke the seal. Inside were financial records, dozens of them, bank statements, wire transfers, donation receipts, all bearing the logo of Pathways Forward and a dozen other nonprofits with names that sounded charitable and meant nothing. And every single one connected back to people Kael knew. Business partners, donors, men he'd shared drinks with, made deals with, trusted. His stomach turned. He flipped through the pages, each one worse than the last. Money flowing from legitimate businesses into shell companies. Shell companies funding charitable programs that were anything but. Omegas listed in spreadsheets like products, assigned identification numbers, tracked by location and status. One name appeared over and over, Councilman Thorne, but he wasn't alone. Kael's own attorney was listed, his accountant, a judge he'd known for 15 years, a union rep who'd helped negotiate contracts for his shipping company. The network wasn't just deep, it was everywhere. Saran watched him, face growing concerned. "What's wrong?" Kael's hands moved slowly. "People I trusted did bad things. Can you fix it?" He wanted to say yes, wanted to promise her that the world was still the safe place he tried to build for her. But he'd stopped lying to his daughter years ago. "I don't know." His phone rang. He answered without checking the caller ID. "Kael Dravik. It's Amara Hightower. We need to talk." Kael glanced at the files spread across his desk. "I'm listening." Thorne made contact with Nyx last night, threatened him, tried to buy him off. When that didn't work, she paused. "We found Elijah Moss this morning." Kael's grip tightened on the phone. "The Omega Nyx tried to help 2 years ago?" "Yes. He's been living under an assumed name in a facility 3 hours north. Psychiatric hold. Involuntary commitment. The paperwork says he's a danger to himself, but the signatures are forged and the facility's owned by a shell company connected to Thorne." Kael's jaw clenched. "You're telling me Thorne's been holding him prisoner for 2 years? I'm telling you we have proof, and Elijah's willing to testify, but only if Nyx does." Kael looked at Saran. She was still watching him, eyes too old, too knowing. "Where's Nyx now?" Kael asked. "Safe house. Federal protection." "But Kael," Amara's voice dropped. "You need to know something. Those files you received this morning? I didn't send them." Kael's blood ran cold. "Then who did?" "Someone inside Thorne's network. Someone who wants out." She hesitated. "And if they're contacting you, it means they think you're the only person with enough power to burn this thing down without getting killed in the process." Kael's eyes scanned the names on the pages in front of him. Men with money, connections, reach. How many people are we talking about? 37 names directly connected to the trafficking operation. Another 100 indirectly connected through donations, investments, or favors. Amara's tone was grim. "This isn't just a case, Kael. It's a conspiracy. And the moment we move on it, everyone involved will know. They'll lawyer up, destroy evidence, disappear. So what do you need?" "I need someone they can't threaten. Someone with enough resources to fight back. Someone willing to stand up in public and say they were wrong." She paused. "I need you." Kael closed his eyes. This was the choice, the real one. He could walk away, pretend he'd never seen the files. Let Amara fight her battle while he kept his daughter safe and his business intact. Or he could step into the fire. "What do you want me to do?" he asked quietly. "Hold a press conference. Tomorrow. Announce that you're cooperating with the investigation. Name names. Make it impossible for them to bury this again. They'll come after me. Yes, they will. They'll come after my family. I'll make sure you have protection. Your protection didn't save Elijah Moss." Kael's voice was cold. "Why should I believe it'll save my daughter?" Silence on the other end of the line. Then Amara spoke, and her voice was raw. Because if you don't do this, Nyx dies, Elijah dies, and every Omega trapped in the system stays trapped. You can't save everyone, Kael, but you can save them. Kael looked at Saran. She was signing something. Small. Tentative. Is Nyx okay? Kael's throat tightened. Not yet. Can you help him? And there it was. The question he'd been avoiding since the moment Nyx walked back into their lives. Could he help? Or would helping just make him another casualty in a war no one was supposed to win? He thought about the look on Nyx's face when he'd signed "I'm tired of being afraid." He thought about his daughter asking if he could fix things. He thought about the files on his desk and the men whose names he recognized. "I'll do it," Kael said. "Thank you. But I'm doing it my way. No press conference. No public announcement. I'm going to every single person on this list, and I'm giving them one chance to come forward voluntarily. The ones who refuse." His voice turned to steel. "I'll make sure they regret it." Amara was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's not legal. Neither is trafficking Omegas." "Kael. This is how it happens, Amara. Take it or leave it." Another pause. "Fine, but you need to move fast. The moment Thorn finds out you have those files, he'll know someone betrayed him. And when that happens..." A crash echoed through the phone. Amara's voice cut off. "Amara?" Kael's grip tightened. "Amara!" Shouting. The sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then the line went dead. Kael's heart slammed against his ribs. He looked at Saran. "Go to your room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me." "What's happening?" "Now, Saran." She didn't argue, just ran. Kael pulled up his security feed on his phone, scanning cameras across the estate. Everything looked normal. Then he switched to the camera covering the front gate. 3 black sedans sat outside. Engines running. Waiting. Who's coming for Kael? The law or something worse? Comment your prediction, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you don't miss what happens next. The ballroom was full again. Not with guests this time. With cameras. Reporters. Federal agents in suits that didn't fit right and expressions that said they'd rather be anywhere else. Nyx stood at the edge of the room, hands clenched at his sides, watching the chaos unfold. This wasn't supposed to happen. Amara had promised him time, had promised him control, had promised him that when he finally went public, it would be on his terms. But Thorn had forced the issue. The attack on Amara's office had been sloppy, desperate. 3 men in masks, no plan beyond intimidation. They'd smashed her windows, destroyed her files, and left before anyone could stop them. But they'd been seen, and one of them had been stupid enough to leave DNA behind. By sunrise, the story was everywhere. Prosecutor attacked. Investigation into trafficking ring. Connections to high-profile donors and politicians. Thorn's name hadn't been mentioned yet, but it would be. Kael stood at the front of the room, flanked by his attorney and 2 federal agents who looked like they hadn't slept in days. His face was carved from stone, expression unreadable. Saran sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap, eyes locked on her father. Nyx wanted to go to her, wanted to tell her this wasn't her fault, that she didn't have to be here, but he couldn't move, because Councilman Thorn had just walked in. He looked exactly the same as he had 3 nights ago. Expensive suit. Perfect hair. Smile that could cut glass. He spotted Nyx immediately, walked straight toward him. The federal agents moved to intercept, but Thorn raised his hands, all innocence. "I'm just here to listen," he said pleasantly. "That's what concerned citizens do, isn't it?" He stopped 3 feet from Nyx, close enough to speak without being overheard. "You made a mistake," Thorn said quietly. Nyx's jaw clenched. "I made a choice that's going to cost you everything." Thorn's smile widened. "You think standing up here, telling your little story, is going to change anything? You think people will believe you? You're an Omega, Mr. Elowen. No family, no money, no credibility, and now you're pregnant." He said the word like it was something dirty. "Who's going to take you seriously?" Nyx's hands moved before he could stop them. Sign language. Fast. Precise. You already lost. Thorn blinked. Didn't understand. But Saran did. She stood up, walked over, positioned herself between Nyx and Thorn. Her hands moved, sharp and deliberate. He said you already lost. And he's right. Thorn's smile finally cracked. Kael, control your... She's fine where she is, Kael said from the front of the room. His voice carried. Everyone turned to look. In fact, I think she should stay there, so everyone can see what this is really about. The cameras swiveled. Thorn's face flushed. This is a farce. No, Kael interrupted. This is a reckoning. He gestured to the screen behind him. It flickered to life. Financial records. The same ones Kael had received that morning. Names, dates, amounts. All of it laid out in black and white. The room went silent. 2 years ago, Kael said, an Omega named Nyx Elowen reported a trafficking operation run through a non-profit called Pathways Forward. He provided testimony, evidence, and recordings. His case was dismissed. He was discredited. And he nearly died because no one wanted to listen. He paused. Let the words sink in. I didn't listen either, and that's on me. Nyx's breath caught. Kael continued. But I'm listening now, and so should all of you. He pointed to the screen. These are the names of everyone involved in the operation. Politicians, business owners, lawyers, judges, people you trust, people I trusted. The cameras zoomed in on the screen. Thorn's name was third from the top. This isn't about one man, Kael said. This is about a system that treats Omegas like property. And it ends today. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Dravik, are you saying you were involved? I'm saying I benefited from a system I didn't question. And that makes me complicit. His voice was steady. But I'm done being complicit. Thorn stepped forward. This is defamation. This is truth. Kael's eyes locked on him. And you know it. Thorn opened his mouth, closed it, looked around the room at the cameras, the agents, the reporters scribbling notes. Then he smiled. Prove it. Nyx's heart sank. Because Thorn was right. Documents could be dismissed. Testimonies could be questioned. Without someone willing to stand up and say the words out loud, none of it mattered. Amara stepped forward. We have Elijah Moss. He's willing to testify. Elijah Moss is mentally unstable, Thorn said smoothly. He's been in psychiatric care for 2 years. No court will take his words seriously. Then they'll take mine. The voice came from the back of the room. Everyone turned. A woman stood in the doorway, mid-30s, dark skin, wearing scrubs and a jacket that had seen better days. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. My name is Saria Cole. I worked for Pathways Forward for 3 years, and I can prove everything. Thorn's face went white. Saria walked down the aisle, pulled a flash drive from her pocket, handed it to Amara. Recordings, she said, of meetings, conversations, instructions on how to place Omegas, how to keep them quiet, how to make them disappear if they became problems. She looked at Thorn. You trained me personally. I have your voice on every single one. The room exploded. Reporters shouting questions. Cameras flashing. Federal agents moving toward Thorn, hands on their weapons. Thorn didn't run. Just stood there, smile finally gone, staring at Saria like she was a ghost. You were one of mine, he said quietly. I was. Saria's voice was cold. And I'm done. An agent grabbed Thorn's arm. Councilman Thorn, you're under arrest. But Nyx didn't hear the rest, because Saran had grabbed his hand, squeezing tight, and when he looked down at her, she was crying. Not sad tears. Relief. Her hands moved. It's over. Nyx wanted to believe her. But as Thorn was led away in handcuffs, he turned back one last time. His eyes found Nyx, and he mouthed 2 words. Not yet. Will Nyx finally be safe? Or is Thorn's threat just the beginning? Drop your theory in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the final chapters. This story isn't over yet. The courthouse steps were cold beneath Nyx's feet. He stood at the top, looking down at the crowd gathered below. Reporters with microphones extended like weapons, protesters holding signs that said things like, "Justice for survivors" and "Believe Omegas." And somewhere in the back, people who'd driven hours just to see what happened next. 3 months had passed since Thorne's arrest. 3 months of depositions, meetings with lawyers, nights spent in safe houses that never felt safe. 3 months of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Today was the verdict. Amara stood beside him, looking older than she had in the coffee shop that night. The suspension had been lifted, but the investigation into her office had left scars. Her hands shook when she thought no one was watching. Kael stood on Nyx's other side. Saran pressed against his leg, holding his hand. The girl had grown quieter over the past months. Not withdrawn, just watchful, like she was learning in real time that justice didn't look the way stories said it should. The courthouse doors opened. A bailiff stepped out. The jury has reached a verdict. The crowd surged forward. Nyx's stomach twisted. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Standing room only. Every seat filled with people who had opinions about Nyx's life, about Omega rights, about whether one person's word could really bring down an empire. Thorne sat at the defense table in a suit that cost more than Nyx would make in a year. His lawyers flanked him like guards. He looked calm, almost bored. Like this was an inconvenience, not a reckoning. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Nyx's legs felt like water. The jury filed in. 12 faces. 12 strangers who'd spent weeks listening to testimony, reviewing evidence, deciding whether Nyx's truth was true enough. None of them looked at Thorne. That was a good sign. Or so Amara had told him. The judge addressed the jury foreman. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit human trafficking, how do you find?" The foreman's voice was steady. "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Shouting, crying, reporters scrambling for their phones. Thorne's lawyers on their feet, objecting to everything and nothing. Nyx couldn't breathe. Guilty. The word echoed in his skull. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order. "On the charge of fraud, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, how do you find?" "Guilty." Each word landed like a hammer. Thorne's face remained blank, but his hands clenched into fists on the table. The judge continued through the charges. 12 in total. Guilty on every single one. When it was done, when the last verdict had been read, the judge looked at Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, you've been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will be scheduled for next month. Until then, you will be remanded to custody without bail." The marshals approached. Thorne stood slowly, buttoned his jacket, and turned to face the gallery. His eyes found Nyx. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Omega and Alpha, victim and perpetrator. Two people whose lives had collided in ways neither of them had expected. Then Thorne smiled. It wasn't the polite smile from the ballroom. It wasn't the threatening smile from the coffee shop. It was something else. Something that looked almost like respect. He signed something. Clumsy, unpracticed, probably learned in prison while awaiting trial. "You won." Nyx's hands moved before he could stop them. "No, we survived." Thorne's smile faded. The marshals led him away. The courtroom exploded again. This time with cheers. Amara was hugging someone. Reporters were shouting questions. Somewhere, someone was crying. Nyx just stood there, hands pressed against his stomach where the baby had started to show. Saran appeared at his side. She took his hand, looked up at him with eyes that understood more than they should. "Are you okay?" Nyx's throat was too tight to speak, so he signed instead. "I don't know yet." Kael's hand landed on his shoulder. Gentle, grounding. "We need to get you out of here," Kael said quietly. "The press is going to want statements, interviews. They'll want to turn you into a symbol." "I'm not a symbol." "I know, but they don't care." Nyx looked at the crowd, at the cameras flashing, at the people who'd spent months dissecting his life for entertainment. "I can't do this," he said. Yes, you can. No, Nyx pulled away. You don't understand. I came here to testify. I came here to tell the truth. And I did. But that doesn't mean I owe them anything else. Amara approached, face flushed with victory. Nyx, the DA wants to know if you'll speak at the press conference. No, she blinked. What? I said no. I'm not doing a press conference. I'm not giving interviews. I'm not becoming the face of this movement or whatever you want to call it. His voice was steady now, clear. I'm done. Amara's expression shifted. Nyx, I understand you're overwhelmed, but this is important. For who? For you? For the case? For all the people who ignored me 2 years ago and suddenly care now that it's convenient. He shook his head. I testified. I told the truth. That's all I agreed to do. But the other victims deserve justice too. But I can't be the one to give it to them. I have a baby coming. I have a life to rebuild. And I'm not sacrificing that so other people can feel good about themselves. Silence fell around them. Amara looked stricken. I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything. Yes, you are. You're asking me to stay visible, to stay vulnerable, to keep reliving the worst parts of my life so the system can prove it's changed. Nyx's hands clenched into fists. But I don't trust the system, and I don't trust that this changes anything. Kael stepped forward. What do you want? Nyx looked at him, the Saran. At the courtroom that had just delivered a verdict that should have felt like victory but mostly just felt like exhaustion. I want to disappear, he said quietly. Not because I'm running, not because I'm afraid, but because I'm choosing to. Kael's expression was unreadable. Where will you go? I don't know yet. Will you come back? Maybe. When I'm ready. Kael nodded slowly. Then his hands moved. You don't owe us anything. Nyx's chest tightened. I know, but if you need help, I'll ask. Saran grabbed Nyx's hand, squeezing tight. Her face was scrunched up, tears streaming down her cheeks. She signed frantically. Don't leave forever. Please. Nyx knelt down, eye level with her. His hands moved slowly. I'm not leaving because of you. I'm leaving because I need to find out who I am when I'm not fighting. But I'll miss you. I'll miss you too. He pulled her into a hug. She clung to him like he might vanish if she let go. When he finally stood, Kael was watching him with an expression that looked almost like grief. You could stay, Kael said. At the estate. The guest house is still empty. You'd be safe. Saran would. I know what Saran would want, but this isn't about her. Nyx's voice was gentle. And it's not about you. It's about me figuring out how to exist in a world that just decided I matter. Kael's jaw tightened. You've always mattered. Not to the people who needed to hear it. They stood there for a moment. Two men who'd been thrown together by circumstance and somehow found something that looked almost like trust. Then Nyx turned and walked toward the side exit. Amara called after him. Nyx, wait. But he didn't stop. He pushed through the door, into the hallway, past the security guards and the reporters who hadn't figured out yet where he'd gone. Outside, the air was cold and sharp and tasted like freedom. He pulled out his phone, a new one, untraceable, and called the only number saved in it. The line rang twice. Hello, it's me, Nyx said. I'm ready. Where do you want to go? Nyx looked back at the courthouse, at the people spilling out the front doors, at the cameras and the chaos and the noise. Somewhere quiet, he said. I can do that. The line went dead. Car pulled up. Black sedan. Tinted windows. The driver didn't ask questions. Just opened the door. Nyx climbed in. As they pulled away, he caught sight of Kael and Saran standing on the courthouse steps. Saran was waving. Nyx raised his hand. Waved back. Then the car turned the corner and they disappeared. Did Nyx make the right choice? Should he have stayed or was leaving the bravest thing he could do? Comment below and subscribe so you're here for the final chapter. This is a story about survival, dignity, and knowing when to walk away. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that barely qualified as a road. Nyx stood on the porch, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone lukewarm, watching the sun rise over trees so thick they looked like walls. 6 months had passed. The baby was born in a hospital 2 towns over, small, healthy, with lungs that could wake the dead. Nyx had named him Zion, not after anyone, just because the name felt like hope. The cabin belonged to a woman named Taya, an Omega who'd escaped the same system decades ago and spent her life helping others do the same. She didn't ask questions, just offered space. Nyx had taken it. The news had moved on. Thorne's sentencing had made headlines for a week. 25 years, no parole, and then faded into the background noise of a world that never stopped breaking. 32 people had been indicted. 19 had taken plea deals. The rest were still fighting. Pathways Forward had been dissolved, its assets frozen, its donors investigated. Other nonprofits had risen to take its place, promising to do better, to be different. Nyx didn't trust them, but Elijah Moss did. He testified at 4 additional trials, helped the FBI dismantle 2 more trafficking rings, and become something he'd never expected, a voice. Saria Cole had started an advocacy group. Amara Hightower had been promoted. Kael Dravik had quietly divested from every company connected to the scandal and started funding legitimate programs for Omega support. The world was changing. Slowly, imperfectly, but changing. Nyx's phone buzzed. He pulled it out. A text from an unknown number. "There's a letter for you. Post office. Town center." He frowned. No one knew he was here except Taya and a handful of people he trusted with his life. But curiosity won. He bundled Zion into a carrier, drove into town, and walked into the small post office that smelled like old paper and dust. The clerk handed him an envelope. Plain, white, no return address. Nyx opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Handwritten. "Nyx, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you want to, but I needed to say it anyway. You were right. About all of it. About the system. About the cost of staying visible. About choosing yourself. Saran asks about you every day. I tell her you're safe. I tell her you're happy. I hope that's true. You didn't ask for this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. You changed everything. Not because you stood up in court. Not because you testified. But because you survived. And surviving is the hardest thing any of us ever do. I won't contact you again unless you want me to. But if you ever need anything, money, protection, help, you know where to find me. You're not alone. Even when you choose to be." Kael. Nyx read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, tucked it into his pocket, and walked back to the car. Zion was asleep in the carrier. Tiny fists curled against his chest, breathing steady and sure. Nyx looked at him for a long time. This was what survival looked like. Not victory, not triumph, just a baby sleeping in a second-hand carrier while the world kept turning. He drove back to the cabin, made a bottle, fed Zion while the sun climbed higher. Later, he'd write a letter back. Not to Kael, to Saran. He'd tell her he was okay, that he thought about her, that she was braver than she knew. But not today. Today, he just sat on the porch, holding his son, watching the trees sway in the wind. The news played on the radio inside. A report about new legislation protecting Omega rights. About investigations into other nonprofits. About systemic change that would take decades to implement. Nyx turned it off. He didn't need to hear it. He'd lived it, and now he was choosing something different. Not silence, not invisibility, but peace. The kind of peace that came from knowing you'd done what you could, said what needed saying, and walked away before the fight consumed you. Zion stirred, made a small sound, settled back into sleep. Nyx smiled. For the first time in 2 years, it didn't feel like pretending. A car drove past on the distant highway. A bird called from the trees. Somewhere, someone was fighting battles Nyx had walked away from. And that was okay, because belonging wasn't about staying in the fire. It was about knowing when to step out of it. Nyx stood, carried Zion inside, closed the door behind him. The world would keep turning. The fight would keep going. But for now, in this moment, he was exactly where he needed to be. Home. Thank you for following Nyx's journey from fear to freedom. His story proves that survival isn't weakness. It's the bravest choice of all. If this story moved you, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next powerful tale. Share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us, what does freedom mean to you? Your words might inspire someone who needs to hear them today. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your voice matters, and you are never alone.